So this gives us kind of an idea of what the color might look like. At least it tells me kind of what the pigment looks like and how transparent it is. But it's not a true test of what the color is going to look like when it's printed at all. To do that, we really need to use one of the proofing screens that has permanent stencils in it for printing. Okay? We have 4 of them, and they're located again under the fans on the left side. What you're seeing here in this screen is you've got open fabric area that allows ink to pass through it, and then you have sealed off fabric where we've used polyurethane to block out or seal off the openings where ink can't pass through those areas. You're also seeing some stain of ink and images in there. And the only way I can tell whether that stain is going to inhibit my printing or not is to look at one of the light sources, either a window or look at the screen up to one of the light panels. Now, what I see is how that stain disappears here, but then here there's some parts that become a silhouette. It's almost like a little eclipse. What I see in terms of stain becomes much darker when I look at it to the light. And what that's telling me is that that stain of ink is sealing off the fabric so I can't print through those lines. Okay? In fact, that's what stain is. If we were to look at the screen microscopically, we'd have these horizontal and vertical strands of fibers, right? And the ink, of course, when we're printing is passing through the holes, but ink is also clinging to and around those fibers, right? And that's what stain is. It's a stain of ink around each fiber. Now, it's not a problem when it's just a stain because there's still holes that the ink can pass through. But once that ink starts to build up and build up and build up, those holes get smaller and smaller until they close, right? Which brings me to another important point. When we're printing, we don't want to let our ink dry in the fabric, right? Because of that very reason. It's going to block out your stencil. So let's proof some of these colors so we can see what they really look like when we print them, okay? I've got just a piece of fine art paper from the fine art paper drawer at the far end of the room. It's just a scrap, it's an old print, okay? And to print, I'll use some of this opaque green first that I was mixing. I just want to take one of my small proofing squeegees and put some ink on it. And then we want to flood the screen or prep it for printing. So I'm just pushing a thin layer of ink into that stencil. And now, when I put it down on the paper, I want to press with the squeegee to push the ink through it, right? And so that's a truer version of what that color is going to look like when it's printed. It's a thin, controlled layer of ink. And unlike relief ink, screen printing dries incredibly quickly, right? It's a bit like, again, acrylic paint. I can expedite the drying process with hair dryers. You'll see hair dryers around the room. And that's pretty dry for the most part. Right? Really quick. Okay. As I said, we don't want to let ink dry in the screen. So when I'm working, I always have a bucket with water and a sponge. Our buckets are located at the far end of the room by the sinks. Okay, they're under the sink or they're under the long table. Okay. So with a damp sponge, I'm just going to wipe up some of that ink. So my bucket allows me a place to get my sponge damp and also wring out all that inky water. You can see we've got these really long strips, and I only printed a small amount of that strip. Right? That's all I need. And now that area is clean. Okay? I don't want to print through a wet area because it'll make the ink bleed. So I want to always print in just a dry area. If I'm cleaning like this, it should dry pretty quickly. Right? I can also use the hairdryer to expedite the process a bit. So let's test our transparent color now and see what that looks like in comparison to this opaque one. Now this one is, again, highly transparent. It's mostly transparent medium. So I'll do the same thing. I'll flood the screen with just a small layer of the color. And then I'm going to have this print on the white of the paper and over that green. And you can see what happens because it's really transparent. It barely shows up on that green. It changes the green a little bit, and when I dry this, it's going to get more transparent. So it made that green a little bit darker. But again, there's just not much pigment in there to change it. In fact, if you look at this, it almost looks like the green is on top of that light color visually. That's, again, push and pull, right? Value contrast. Because the paper is white, this pushes back onto the paper, where the green has much more dark contrast off of that light and it pulls forward.